So I'm here today in the Intensity X3 Ninja Layer to impart a little bit of knowledge on you when it comes to your push-up and your plank position. And you're probably thinking, Joe, I've been doing push-ups and planks for as long as I've been working out. But first off, it doesn't mean you've been doing them right. And second off, maybe it just means that you haven't been getting as much out of them as you could. What's one thing that push-ups and planks share in common? It's the fact that whether I'm in a plank position with my elbows on the ground or I find myself further up into a push-up, I pretty much find myself in the same alignment when it comes to the position from my shoulders to my hips to my heels. There happens to be a lot going on in between those different parts of our body, and that's where things go wrong. I'm sure at some point in time when you've been doing planks or you've been seeing others, you've probably seen this position, which inherently you're like, okay, doesn't look too bad. Maybe my hips are a little bit too far down. And so you push those hips back up. Same thing with our push-up. I'm sure at some point in time you've seen a push-up that tends to bring the rest of the body up, but the hips just don't seem to come with it. That's a really important piece, and I need for you to pay attention to it. There's over 30 muscles that attach to what we call your LPHC, your lumbo-pelvic hip complex. Think of it as just your hips, everything attaching above and below. And when it comes to the positions that we just saw in the plank and the push-up, what's happening is that low back is becoming the pivot points in the exercise. We don't want that. We're trying to work in a push-up our chest and our shoulders. Obviously our core is engaged the entire time. If we're in a plank position and we're trying to work that core musculature on the front side of the body, we obviously don't want it to be getting into the low back and have movement through the hips. So here's gonna be your fix. So you find yourself in what would be a traditional push-up position. Now, if you guys are watching in the video right now, it looks like a relatively straight line, right? But if you guys can pay attention to the arrow that's also in the video, that is showing you the direction that gravity is weighing on those hips. Now, in a healthy body, this might not cause a lot of issues. And for the most part, for me to stay nice and relaxed in my torso, if everything else is fine as I do my push-up, isn't the end of the world. But what happens, even for someone like myself, or maybe like you, is that over time, as we get fatigued or the core gets fatigued, you start to worm up off the ground, right? We've lost that core engagement and tension, especially anyone who might have low back pain, yourself or a client. You get that additional pressure as we're hanging on those hip flexors, those tendons, ligaments, and all the tissues that attach to that pelvis. So what we wanna do, we just wanna tuck the butt. That's it. I want you to try that at home right now. If you're watching, next time you get into that position, feel what it feels like to hang down, right? Even in a mirror, it looks like a straight line versus pushing your butt in the air. Tuck your hips under, squeeze your butt. And you might feel like you're like a little bit rounded in that upper back, but that's okay. Right away, you're gonna feel a lot more core engagement. And now, the real pivot point in the exercise becomes the feet. We want the whole body to come down and to come back up in that push-up position. It's not gonna make the push-up easier, it's actually gonna make it harder, but in a good way. You're gonna focus on the muscles that we're trying to work. So tuck that butt, lead with your face in your chest, and watch that entire body come back up together. Thankfully, you can apply the exact same thing in your plank position as well. Let's visit what would look like and be our normal, somewhat flat back plank position. We think straight line between our shoulders and our heels, right? That's okay, but what we really are concerned about is more of a straight line between our shoulders and our hips, and then from our hips to our heels. Because the way the human body works for many of us is that pelvic tuck is gonna allow for you to engage some of your core musculature in a slightly different way. Right away, you're gonna feel, oh wow, okay Joe, I know what you're talking about. Try tucking those hips underneath and be less worried about the straight line between our shoulders and our heels and more about getting a good core contraction to keep that weight and the gravity out of the low back and in the muscles that we're trying to work. So don't hesitate to give yourself a check next time you pop down into that push-up or plank position to make sure those hips are in the right spot and that we're working those muscles we're trying to work.